welcome to another Ease Live tutorial. In this video, we are going to talk about the concept of active and deactive scenes, which are a very useful concept in Ease Live for managing multiple scenes that can expand and collapse, for example, especially when the user is allowed to open and collapse things themselves. Then it takes some of the heavy lifting out of setting up logic for making sure that there are no conflicts on screen. Let me show you specifically what I mean. So here we have a lower third and has this image which can expand and collapse. I won't cover the sort of the layout itself in too much detail, but hopefully this makes sense. There's a container layer here. Inside it there is an image which just is stuck to the edges of its container with a 56 pixel margin at the bottom, which is the height of this text box, which is also inside the same container. So in this example, all we're going to be doing is doing stuff to the height of this container to make this little kitten show and hide. So let's just set that to leave that at 250, for example. So that's all well and good. We are going to want this to show and hide. We want the user to show and hide it themselves so that they can choose whether they want to obscure the video behind it. But in addition to that, I've set up another example, which is basically the exact same thing, just upside down. Another container with some content, in this case a simple map layer. And we want the user to be able to expand and collapse this as well. And when we preview now, of course, we'll notice that if they're both expanded at the same time, they have a little collision there, and we don't want that to happen. We would like these to automatically collapse when the other one expands. And this is where the power of active and deactive scenes comes in. Because in Ease Live, only one scene at a time can be active. So that when we now, as we are about to do in a moment, we set up click triggers on these to activate this scene. And when that happens, we're going to create a little animation that expands it. Ease Live will automatically deactivate any other scenes that might be active. And this is only one can be active at a time. So that means that we only need to worry about activating whatever we want to activate, and everything else will just kind of happen automatically without any further triggers or extra logic that we need to set up manually. So let's just dive right in. As I mentioned, we would like this container, when the lower third comes in, we would like it to be smaller. And when the user clicks it, we would like it to expand. Then we want it to collapse again when they click again, basically toggling this on and off. So we have our starting point set up correctly. I will go ahead and make this 56 pixels tall. And then we have these animations down here. We know show and hide already. They fire automatically when the scene is shown and hidden. In fact, let's just go ahead and why not just slide this in from the bottom. Let's add these so it looks a little bit more realistic when we preview this. There we go. So now we have animations and it comes in collapsed as we expected. Now, what we want then is to also be able to activate and deactivate. These animations fire automatically when a scene is activated and deactivated. So let's just go ahead and create those while we're doing animations. In this case, when the scene is activated, we would like the height to animate to, let's say, 250. And we're going to remove this value here because it's not necessary. If you remove the from value of an animation, it just, you see it says auto here, and that means it animates from whatever value it happens to have when the animation fires. And while it wouldn't make much of a difference in this case, it just means that if we were to change our mind about the height, for example, later, as we're designing, we don't need to go back and find every animation that assumes a specific height as well. We just leave that open, and then we don't need to worry about it if that were to change, or if for any reason it has a different height. For example, you could have other animations that also affect the height in different circumstances. So we are going to keep it simple. And then when it's deactivated, we would like to animate the height back to 56 in this case. So here we do assume the height because we need to animate it to a specific size, but we don't care what height it is when we collapse it. So that means if we want to change the sort of expanded height, we only have to change it here. We don't need to update anything here. All right, so now we have the animation set up, but if we go and preview it, nothing happens when we click, as one might expect, because we haven't actually told these live that anything should happen when we click. We have kind of hinted at it, but these don't fire by themselves because there's all kinds of ways that you could activate a scene through all kinds of triggers and logic. So here, we're going to go to our triggers tab here, and we're going to add a trigger when the layer is clicked. We'll open this just to show you there are multiple triggers here when the layer is shown or long pressed or the mouse enters or leaves. You can do all kinds of stuff here. But when this layer is clicked, we want to go to this activate, deactivate category. And we could activate the scene, we could deactivate it, but we're going to go with toggle active deactive. That just means that if it's deactive, it'll activate it. And if it's already active, it'll deactivate it automatically. So that we don't need to make separate triggers for handling each case. And the target here is our lower third. That is what we're going to be manipulating. But notice that we could also activate other scenes from here. So you can have triggers affect the graphics across scenes and across the sort of application. So now, if we preview, we can see that we can click it and we can click it again. There we go. So that's all pretty straightforward, hopefully. We have now set up a trigger. And notice what happened here. When you click a layer, that's another cool thing about active and deactive scenes, as opposed to sort of manually just triggering animations and hooking up your own logic, is that when you click outside of your graphics, you basically, when you click this background here, which would be a video, when you're implementing this on top of a video player, it also deactivates whatever is active. So we don't need to create a sort of background layer to catch this click and then add a trigger to deactivate and all that stuff. This is automatic as well. So click outside, it hides. Click again, it hides because we chose the toggle. So now, of course, we haven't done anything to our location bug yet, but we want to do the same thing there. So let's just quickly do that so that we can see this whole thing in action again. Well, let's just go ahead and slide this in from the top on show, quickish, and we will slide it out when it leaves. There we go. And then the same thing again. I've got this on, let's say 180 because it's a nice round number. That's what we're going to animate to. But we're going to set this to the same height as the text box to begin with. That is 32. There we go. And then we want to animate the height, like we mentioned, to 180. And again, we're going to remove the from value. You'll probably find yourself doing that a lot. It's a very common thing to not have a from value. Sometimes you do want it, but it's typically very often unnecessary. Delete that again, and we want to animate it back to 32 when it's deactivated. And then once again, on this container, we're going to add a similar trigger to what we just did. When the layer is clicked, we want to toggle the active deactive state of the location bug. And now this will do the same thing. Lovely. And this is where the magic happens. If we now bring in both of these, click on this, it activates. And now if I click on this, it activates, and the opposite one deactivates. And this would be true for however many things you have. We have 2 things here now, but you could have a sidebar, you can have all kinds of stuff. And no matter how many things you have, EaseLive will always make sure that only one thing is active. Of course, we can deactivate this to have none of them active. But there you go. So that is a simple use case for active and deactive scenes and how to trigger them by clicking. Of course, you can use other triggers as well, and how to make them animate. All right, hopefully that makes sense. And in future videos, we can look at even more advanced use cases for active, deactive scenes and triggering them in other ways, based on data sources, for example, which is where it gets really fun.